Welcome, everyone. This is our fourth in a series that goes through the rest of the year, generally the second and fourth Thursdays of the month. However, our next webinar is Wednesday, August 19th at 1 p.m. with Dave Olvera in a conversation about avoiding negative self-talk, especially the what ifs post-mission. Today, we're excited to be hearing from Rhonda Kelly on Survive, Thrive, and Matter in 2020. She'll be giving us a deep dive tour of the ResponderStrong tool, which she developed through a partnership with the University of Colorado to collect and aggregate better mental health supports for responders and their families. If you haven't already, while we are making introductions, please visit www.responderstrong.org and create an account so you can follow along on the tour. 2020 is a year where most people can agree that each month one-upped the one before it. More than ever before, we are faced with novel challenges in our lives as responders and as everyday people. The good news, how we respond to those challenges determines how we are impacted. The better news, there's a free tool to help responders and their families practice self-care and self-preservation, not only surviving, but thriving. As CEO of the MedEvac Foundation International, and on behalf of our board, staff, volunteers, and especially our donors, who together make all of our taking care of our own Help is on the Way programming possible, welcome everyone. Now we'll have Jared Hughes, the Foundation's Development Director, introduce our speaker. Jared.
Thanks, Cameron. Before I introduce our guest today, I did want to make a pitch for our Run to Help the Helpers, which is our annual run, walk, roll, swim, golf challenge that started in May and is running through the end of the year. We have over 150 participants so far, with people signing up for one of the several events available for all abilities, from a 1-mile family fun run to a 1,000-mile cycling fundraising challenge from our board chair, Howard Ragsdale. Howard is halfway to his 1,000-mile goal and is almost 8% of the way to his goal of raising $71,000 for our EMS mental health and wellness programs before his 71st birthday. I want to give a special shout out to our many individual donors and corporate sponsors to date: Metro Aviation, Lifeline 3, Apollo MedFlight, CAMTS, and Flightbridge Ed. You can sign up to support Howard's ride, start your own ride, and follow his progress through our homepage at medevacfoundation.org or by Googling Run to Help the Helpers. Now to our speaker. I am honored to have Rhonda Kelly with us today. We've had a great interest in our posts about Rhonda's presentation from all over the world, with thousands of likes and dozens of shares, so I suspect ResponderStrong is going to have a big bump in new accounts created this week, and that's great. We appreciate GMR sharing her with us today. A little bit about Rhonda. She started her career in EMS as an expanded practice EMT, working aboard icebreakers for the U.S. Antarctic program. She volunteered as an EMT for a rural ambulance service and worked full-time for Rural Metro in Aurora, Colorado. She earned her RN while serving as a firefighter, paramedic for Aurora Fire, and in EVs for 17 years, and the last 3 as their health and safety officer. In that precinct role, she developed physical fitness, nutrition, wellness, crisis response, and medical wellness programs for the outfit. In 2016, pursuing a passion in the unaddressed mental health impacts of emergency response work, she founded ResponderStrong, which is a collaboration between the National Mental Health Innovation Center at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus to build medical health supports and create a clearinghouse for wellness resources for first responders. In 2017, she worked full-time growing the ResponderStrong initiative beyond Colorado. In 2020, she transitioned her brainchild to our friends at the All Clear Foundation, which was founded by Global Medical Response. And then the All Clear Foundation, I understand, is in the process of spinning off to be its own standalone nonprofit, which we're excited about. GMR wisely didn't want to lose her and offered her a position as National Director of GMR Life, which they define as health, wellness, and resilience. Rhonda, we're thrilled to have you with us, and we are grateful for you, for your life's work. Thank you for seeing your vision and dream through to reality. We're looking forward to collaborating with you, ResponderStrong, and the All Clear Foundation to take care of our own. Given your first job, we're just so delighted to have you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jared, for the very kind introduction. I appreciate it. And I am really delighted to be here. Thank you all for your time. To get going, thank you for being so thorough in the evaluation, everybody, or the summarization of my history. So I come from EMS starting back last century in 1996, have moved up through nursing from firefighter, paramedic. ResponderStrong, the initiative that we created in 2016, had the goal of improving mental health supports for emergency responders and for their family members, in recognition that families are a key support for successful, long, happy careers as an emergency responder, and that families oftentimes inadvertently suffer from the impacts of our work, even though we are not intentionally bringing it home with us. So one of the innovative ways we approached mental health with emergency responders was we worked across branch boundaries. Back in 2012, the University of Colorado Anschutz, the medical school for CU, the director of the Center for Depression approached me and said he wanted to work with firefighters, asked what we needed. And I told him at the time, what we need is to stop working in the isolation of our agencies and also the isolation of our branches. All four branches, EMS, fire, law enforcement, and dispatch, suffer from the predominant exposure in their career being that to the intense trauma and suffering of other people, in the complete absence of any skills, any training, how to deal with that, how to recognize it, and how to protect ourselves and treat ourselves when we're developing what's now recognized as a stress injury. On top of that, we all operate in cultures that have traditionally been very much eat our own. Any admission of mental or emotional impact has been long viewed as an admission of weakness, as an unfitness for duty. And it has been a significant barrier for responders reaching out for help, which is why we've long recognized since about 2011, 2012, that suicide is in fact our leading occupational killer. We have so many responders that out of stigma and shame would rather go to their graves than admit that they were struggling and suffering. And that was really something we needed to approach. In order to change that cultural aspect, we realized we'd be far more effective were we to approach this across branch boundaries. We all share the same issue, we share very similar cultures, and it was time for us to start working together cohesively. What we also did to bring in additional resources and supports to bolster our mission was we developed very strategic partnerships with our advocates to include educators, researchers, clinicians, and foundations, because you always got to have the money. It always comes back around to that. So we were very successful in our first several years producing a lot of content around psychoeducation and awareness. We have several partnerships of which I'm very proud, spanning the gamut from mental health curriculum for community colleges and entry-level training academies to resiliency content that is available for use by agencies or peer support teams, to a video series that we help support called Lifelines. It is a 6-video segment or a 6-video series, about 10 to 20 minutes each, that focus on the ways responders inadvertently bring trauma home to their families. It talks about post-traumatic stress injury, talks about substance misuse as a failed attempt at coping with trauma and the absence of other skills. It talks about the impacts on children of having emergency responder parents, talks about depression, and a multitude of other issues. It's also available free, that series, to any entity or organization that wants to use it to promote conversation and awareness. As we continued to develop our content, I had the great pleasure of meeting the head of the All Clear Foundation, Janelle Farr, and meeting up with the executives, Randy Owen, the CEO, and his administration for global medical response. I was struck by the passion, the sincere passion that I saw within Randy and his chief operating officer, his chief medical officer, and many others in his organization to better support not only the mental health, but the overall well-being of their personnel. We had a lot of open discussions about how EMS is oftentimes treated as sort of a stepchild in the emergency response world, more poorly resourced than even fire and law enforcement, who still need more resources, but also how oftentimes the pay is lower, the benefits are lower, especially for ground crews. There aren't any bases or stations to operate out of. They're crammed in the cab of the ambulance for many hours during their shift. The very nature of the work, going from 0 to 60 and then back again. The sedentary nature in between the episodes of intensity. So talked about how there hadn't been a national standard set for the best way to care for emergency medical personnel, in part because the community has been so fragmented. Lots of it is volunteer, some of it's municipal, and a lot of it's been private. So really encouraged them to take action. They have the reach, they have the awareness, and they have the capacity to set a standard. So out of that discussion came a role for me. I moved ResponderStrong to All Clear Foundation and continue to lead it from within that organization. And also I'm quite delighted to be working with GMR to build out an overall wellness system for their personnel. So then 2020 happened. I started in January and had no idea what was coming. None of us did. But let's talk about 2020. I know everybody's aware of this. It's been just a banner year. COVID-19, the pandemic and the scale, the size, the intensity that it exists at, it has been, what do I hear the word? Unprecedented. We know it's not, but it is in our lifetimes. The resulting global economic impact, quite frequently when we talk to responders across branches, we hear very consistently their top 4 stressors identified as administrative stressors, financial stressors, stress management skills or the lack thereof, and relationship problems. When we look at the sequela to the pandemic this year, we see the global economic impact, the record unemployment. Many of us have had our significant others or other family members lose their jobs or become furloughed. We've had a near complete disruption of our social systems and lifestyle. In the wake of all of this, we've also been experiencing and been mired in widespread social unrest and public addressing of systemic inequities, which needs to happen, but it's happening at a time when we find ourselves struggling with some of the greatest challenges of our lives in, ironically, an environment that robs us of our greatest supports. When we look at the fear, the uncertainty, and the instability that this year has generated from us, destroying institutions and practices that we thought were unalienable, leaving us reeling a little bit. We now find ourselves in the time of social distancing where isolation is encouraged, and we all know what a negative impact isolation has on our psyche and on our overall well-being. We are experiencing loss and grief at a large scale as our society, and we all know that we're not very good at dealing with either of those. Those are, again, skills that societally we don't really focus on. We feel a little bit taboo and uncomfortable around those. It's like every day being a death notification to somebody. It's just not something you get used to. What we're finding is during this time of response and how we've changed as a society to attempt to manage the disease, we have been ironically stripped of the self-care practice that have sustained us in times of stress in the past, whether it is going to the gym, having family gatherings, going to church, going to sporting events, whether it is having birthday parties, celebrations, get-togethers with friends, having time when you can just relax and do the things that mean the most to you, having time to get away, get off grid, take a vacation. All of those things have been stripped from us. And what we're finding as a result of this is when we look at the psychological impacts of COVID-19 in comparison to other large-scale disasters during our lifetime, in particular 9/11, SARS, and MERS. For 9/11, SARS, and MERS, it was noted that depression, anxiety, and and post-traumatic stress injury were the biggest associated psychological impacts. What we've been seeing for this year, however, is that burnout is being identified as the most relevant and prevalent of the stress injuries. And I'm sure that comes as no shock to anybody. We originally thought this would be a sprint, then it turned into a marathon. I've heard it compared to a triathlon. Last week, I heard somebody compare it to a tri-marathon, which I still don't think succeeds in capturing the impact of this. But it is essentially a war. It's very similar. It's a war on an enemy that we can't see. We don't know how it's going to end. We don't know when it's going to end. We don't know what the long-term or the short-term impacts in our lives are going to be. It in itself has been very, very destabilizing. And when we look at what the definition of burnout is, it's a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion. So all three interwoven. It's caused by excessive and prolonged stress, which is COVID and 2020 in a nutshell. It occurs when we feel overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and unable to meet the constant demands. And the reason we're unable to meet those constant demands is they have exceeded our capacity, in no small part because we have failed to meet our basic human needs. Not through any fault of our own, it's just we have the responder mindset. This is a crisis, we need to respond in crisis. We elevate like we're responding to a call with our sympathetic nervous systems, with the ways that we choose to operate, socially, mentally, emotionally, and physically. But our systems can't handle that long term in the absence of self-care practices, which I know in the past our culture is very much viewed as a luxury, but it's not. Now it is the most essential of the essential tools that will help us not only survive this, but thrive and succeed in it. So one of the great things that I'm pleased to be presenting to you today is I'm not just outlining a problem that which you are already intimately aware, but we're also presenting a solution. Back in April of this year, the Anschutz Foundation, a local philanthropic group here in Colorado, reached out to ResponderStrong and a local partner, Grit Digital Health. If you're familiar with the program Man Therapy, a program using humor to target suicide prevention and awareness among working age males, that's them, that's Grit. Grit has gone on to create a mental well-being or overall well-being platform that has been active for more than 5 years now. It's had more than 60 different iterations of the platform, including one for rural veterans. It is very refined, very user-friendly, and very confidential. We are delighted to have been able to work with the Anschutz Foundation and also with All Clear Foundation and GMR to provide this tool at no charge to all emergency responders and their families across the country. By emergency responders, we mean fire, law enforcement, EMS, dispatch, all of their subsidiaries. We also mean emergency medical personnel, the doctors, the nurses, the techs, and the ER, who are bearing the brunt of a lot of this, and their family members. And we'll talk a little bit more about why the reach is so broad. Earlier, you were suggested to pop onto the ResponderStrong.org website. If you did, you'll see a pop-up that will send you to the u.responderstrong.org site. This tool isn't an app, it is a mobilely responsive web platform. A couple great things about it: if you choose to use it on a laptop or a computer, it operates just like a website. If you open it on your phone, you open it through a browser, whichever you prefer, but it operates like an app. It gives us a lot of flexibility and also gives us a lot of control and real-time responsiveness in the content manager on the backside. So to create an account, you're invited to select your responder type. Community and family is an option. So those who aren't necessarily frontline responders themselves but have an interest are also welcome to join this. Most of the content targets the human behind the badge and the uniform, so it's applicable to all of us. But as you wade through it, you'll find there's a lot of content that is very specific to each branch and addressing not only the current stressors, but the long-standing stressors within our occupations, and providing access to resources and knowledge to help improve the impacts that you're experiencing. To log in, it does require verification with Facebook, Google, or with an email address. And of course, the first response I get from every responder is, if it's confidential, why do I have to put my email address in? It's for verification. It's to ensure the system isn't attacked by bots, isn't overrun, isn't crashed. Your personal information is in no way ever connected with usage of the tool. It's mainly used to prevent or to screen those who are entering the tool, and then to allow you to have a personalized experience. There is a tremendous amount of content contained within this tool, and we didn't want it to become overwhelming. We've all seen resources that were well-intentioned, but when we're stressed and we have limited bandwidth, we can't just wade through. It's like the Baskin-Robbins 30 Wonderful Flavors dilemma. When there's 31 choices to make, it's really hard to make a choice, and it's also really challenging to be satisfied with that choice in the end. Now, this system recognizes you are the same user each time, doesn't identify who you are personally, but will recognize what content interests you and populates your feed more with the content that has those tags, is associated with those tags. Having your own account also allows you to share the information that you find interesting and to save it for yourself for future reference. So this is what the login page looks like at u.responderstrong.org. Once you create an account, you'll pop into it and you'll see that the information has been subdivided into 3 different domains. Succeed is our first domain. Succeed is about occupational and academic success, success in life with whatever matters to you. You'll find throughout that there are little reality checks. Those are self-quizzes. It's just for your personal information. It'll ask you a series of questions about each of these subdomains in each larger domain: succeed, thrive, and matter. Allow you to rate how you're doing and where you'd like to be, which helps you then focus what information you choose to navigate through the system. Succeed, thrive, and matter are the same for every platform that utilizes you, but we held a focus group, several focus groups with responders to figure out what the subdomains should be. Leading and following is one, professional development, finances and retirement. Again, going back to the top 4 stressors consistently acknowledged by responders. We know finances is a big one. We also know retirement is a big one. We all tend to identify so closely with our roles that once we lose that identity in the absence of having prepared for this transition, we really run the risk of being inundated by all of the exposures and the content and the stress that we accumulated over the course of our career and just compartmentalized rather than processing. So there's a lot of information about that there, and we'll touch on that in Matter. Work-life balance is another very popular topic. Higher education and secondary employment, also big topics. And tactical performance. Whatever you do, whatever you choose to do, we've got content to show you how to do it better. The next category is Thrive. Thrive is all the things. It is your medical health, your physical health, nutrition, fitness, sleep, which is a big one, anger management, trauma processing, loneliness and depression, mental and emotional health challenges, alcohol, substance use, and addictions. Talking about it, how in many times, in times of crisis or when we're feeling overwhelmed, our coping mechanisms are overwhelmed by what we're experiencing in life or what we're thinking in our heads. Big shout out to the upcoming self-talk presentation that Cameron had mentioned. That is one of the biggest key points, one of the things we can most control. And as many of us know, we tend to be our worst enemy. So what's going on in our head is something that pops up in this category also. But at any rate, when we are overwhelmed, we tend to default to what is culturally not only condoned, but reinforced. For many of us, that's alcohol. Maybe not addiction, but overuse or misuse. And unfortunately with EMS, it can be really tempting to look at the NARC box, to look at prescription medications. One of the things we see with responders across all branches is that it's not okay to talk about our soul pain. It's not okay to talk about our heart pain, but wow, you blow your shoulder out, go to work comp, and you get a prescription for a narcotic. Now, not only does your joint feel better, but your soul feels better. And that really heightens the risk of addiction for us. It's numbing to a whole different level. And oftentimes we don't understand it. We don't have the context and we don't have the vocabulary. And we have a lot of fear around reaching out and admitting something that our culture holds to be very shameful behavior. So again, anger management, trauma, stress, anxiety, chronic injuries and disabilities. We talk about that a lot, and particularly with the prescription drug aspect, and also the change in status and role, not only in our occupations, but perhaps within our families. Lots of great content. Matter is the last one. This is the existential component. This is talking about grief and loss, how to process it, how to manage it, how to wade through it rather than block it and deny it. One of my favorite quotes is from Rachel Naomi Remen that talks about walking through trauma with expecting not to be impacted is just like walking through water with expecting not to get wet. There's a lot around that in grief and loss. Relationships often suffer in the emergency response line of work, and they are suffering so much more now with fears of, is the responder going to get sick, or is the responder inadvertently going to bring the virus home to the family? And what impact will that have on the family? How much time does the responder have to spend away? What do we do if we need to isolate or quarantine? How do we protect our family? There are a lot of stressors. For law enforcement right now, there are just tremendous social pressures on their family, especially their children, and social media interactions, teaching them how to process the media, how to understand, how to think for themselves. Mindfulness and balance. We all know mindfulness is awesome. It is the next big cure-all, or the closest thing to a cure-all that we have. But stress in the moment is a really hard time to implement this skill. We can't just read a book or listen to a YouTube. We have to be able to implement these tools before we're in that time of crisis, or to implement them consistently so that they're there when we need them. We talk about faith and spirituality, the existential crises that can come out of emergency medical work in particular. The wondering why the drunk survived and the family of 4 is dead, wondering how God let this happen, wondering why this keeps happening, all of the things, and I know you've all experienced those. This talks about ways to help us transition our worldview, not to the negative one, but to one that gives us a refined meaning and purpose and pulls us away from losing hope, which we know the loss of hope is the last step before a responder takes his or her own life. Diversity and inclusion, got a lot of content around that. Family and friendships, how to navigate those and make them very successful. And community. We know that community support is essential to us when we talk about the basic human needs, that this is just something that we cannot neglect. Yet society is encouraging us to do that right now. So talking about ways to get healthy community connection. And one of my favorite stories on the prevention of burnout or the identification of it comes from Lawrence Levy. I don't know if any of you are familiar with him. He is a former CFO of Pixar Films. He was hired back in the day, late 90s, early 2000s, to turn Pixar around from the struggling filmmaker that it was into the behemoth that it is today. So he was part of the dream team that resulted in Monsters Incorporated and everything that came after that. Yet at the time when he had achieved this pinnacle of success in Silicon Valley, he was working 24/7, he was making bank, he had social prestige, everybody looked up to him. He realized he had all the external markers of success, but inside he never felt so empty. Being a longtime practicing meditator, going back to the mindfulness piece, he started doing some introspection and wondered, why, when I have all this success, am I feeling worse than I ever have before? And what he realized is he was experiencing burnout. Nothing really mattered to him. He just felt numb. He was exhausted all the time. He couldn't enjoy the spoils of his work. When he really evaluated that, he realized he was burned out because he'd been neglecting his basic human needs. He wasn't spending time with family and friends. He wasn't getting rest. He wasn't getting exercise. He wasn't getting some time away from working at Pixar to expand his mind, to give his psyche a chance to rest and to be creative. So he went one step further, and granted, he probably had some more financial latitude than many of us do, but he started to evaluate, could he meet his basic human needs and still live and compete in the Silicon Valley culture? He decided no, he couldn't. So actually now he travels around the country talking about stress and burnout and how we meet our basic human needs, that this is our greatest weapon. And now more than ever, and I mentioned it earlier, it is the time for us to recognize the tremendous importance of self-care skills. They aren't luxuries. They are the most essential of all the essential tools that we have. Our greatest asset as any emergency response agency or organization is our personnel. And now is when our personnel are under the greatest attack and challenge. Yet, through practice of self-care skills, through exploration, through bringing our mindset off of the constant news feeds and the negativity of social media into something here that's positive, that gets us, that allows us to navigate our experience, we can really make a difference in how we're experiencing our lives and how our family members are experiencing theirs. So to give you a little sneak peek at what it looks like in case you haven't been able to log in, this is back to the Succeed home screen. You'll see over on the right the most viewed content. I always like looking at that, seeing what everyone else is looking at. There's a lot of reality in here. As you can see from the article there, everything sucks sometimes. This isn't Pollyanna-ish. This really recognizes some of the challenges that we face and makes some good suggestions for how to navigate those in a healthy way. We have the Thrive, suicide and emergency responders. We talk about that a lot. We know that suicide continues to be our leading occupational killer. And I find it really interesting. Back when we first started ResponderStrong, it was the big taboo thing to talk about suicide. Now, it's become much more mainstream, which I think is very much to our credit and to our benefit. But there are other taboo topics behind that when we start looking at substance misuse. That's a big one. We start looking at domestic violence and anger management. All of those things plague our community, and all of those things have their roots in not being able to or failing to take care of ourselves. Again, that's reinforced by some of the more toxic aspects of our culture, the whole suck it up buttercup. If you're fit for the job, you should just have these skills coming in. You shouldn't need to ask for help. You shouldn't need to train on these things, when in fact, all of us do. And I see it as, given the nature of the work that we do, we need to train on this more than anyone else, because we've got the stressors that everybody else has. And then we are called in to witness the worst days of a multitude of strangers' lives. It's challenging. Nobody is built to manage that. We all come with a certain amount of resilience, but in our work, we need to work not only to maintain that resilience, but to grow it and to make it stronger, just like we do in the gym. You don't go in and just lift the same weight, same reps every single day. You want to grow, you want to expand to meet new challenges. We have questionnaires, trauma screening questionnaires, sleep questionnaires, lots of assessments to allow you privately to determine, am I working too much? Do I have sleep issues? Do I have sleep apnea? Is this something that maybe I should go see a doctor for? Again, the reality checks are peppered with a lot of different questions that can help you identify crisis situations. If you're at a point you're wondering if you are just sad and down or burned out versus are you suffering from depression or suicidality, if you answer in a couple of the questions in the reality check that indicate maybe you are in a crisis point, Crisis resources, completely anonymously, will pop up and allow you to use them. Again, there is no overview, there is no one moderating. This is built for your personal experience. Part of the reason I'm so excited about this is when I first started with Aurora Fire as the health and wellness officer, and we built our peer support team. I was talking to a buddy on the job one day, and finally he just rolled his eyes and said, "Stop counseling me, just give me the tools to fix this." That tends to be the responder mindset, and I hear that phrase over and over again. Might have used it myself a couple times, and this is what this is. This is a tool to help you help yourself, and to normalize your experiences. So much of the research has shown us when we think that someone else is struggling that we work with, odds are we're right. If we think we're the only one who's struggling, definitely we're wrong. Last category, again, matter. Great content in here. It's a mix of videos, audios, articles, resources, websites. A lot of TED Talks through here, many by responders. And this brings up a point. This video from a volunteer firefighter. Volunteer responders are absolutely welcome to use this tool. We know that they have some unique challenges beyond those of the career responders in that they often live and work in the same community. Many times the victims that they are responding to are at least acquaintances, if not friends or family. They oftentimes lack the social support that we have as crews on career organizations. Many times when they leave the scene, no matter how heinous it was, they've got a 10 or 15-minute drive by themselves in the car and are expected to transition back to home life mode without any support, without defusing, without debriefing. We know too that volunteer organizations oftentimes accept personnel as young as 14 years old. Science has shown us that as adults, we don't fully develop cognitively till about 25. There is a lot of question around what does the level of cognitive development do to impact a young volunteer or a young responder's or a young military member's processing of trauma in the moment? And how does that processing of trauma in the moment impact that individual's subsequent cognitive development? A lot of concerns around that. We definitely want to wrap our arms around the volunteer firefighter and EMS community and volunteer responders across the country. We know they need a little extra love, and there's content in there specifically targeting them. So talking about the populations that we target, yeah, fixed wing, rotor, military. We know that the emergency response professions, especially the flights, tend to entrain veterans more than the other occupations across the country. The last update that I saw said veterans represent about 6% of the national workforce, yet they represent about 22% of the emergency responder workforce across the country. We know many times that these veterans have chosen this work because it's very similar to the military, with mission, with purpose. They got into their job to help people, and that's invariably what the answer is when you ask any responder why they do what they do. Shared mission. We also know many times they can be bringing in pre-existing stress injury and trauma that then can be triggered in the rich environment that emergency medical response and emergency response overall offer. So that is a demographic that we also have specific interest in. One of the things that I've been sad to see is that the veteran responders are disproportionately represented in our suicide rates. One particularly haunting study originated in Colorado from the State Office of Suicide Prevention. A 10-year survey of death certificates revealed during 2004 to 2014, veterans comprised 20% of the suicides across Colorado, which was representative of their numbers in the population. But when they screened that data, they filtered it for just those who had emergency response professions down as their typical occupation. Veterans represented 46% of the suicides, more than double their representation among our ranks. So this is another group that we especially reach out to in recognition that they oftentimes have greater challenges. When we look at the regular challenges of the job, that's one thing. We look at COVID, but then we also look at things like this, the helicopter crash and the bottom frame. When we lose one of our own, whether it is to suicide, to accident, to attack, to violence, it is really a tough blow for us. It erodes some of that bravado and some of that immortality complex that our culture encourages us to have, and can send us into greater existential crises. It can further compound the stressors on our families. I remember after the theater shooting in Aurora, talking to some of the family members from our agency and having significant others tell me, I didn't realize this was a dangerous job until now, which kind of knocked me back on my feet. So how could you not recognize this was dangerous? But it's what we tell the family, or more importantly, what we don't tell the family, and how we fail to prepare them. That's one of the big reasons we wanted to include the family in these tools. If we want responders to be resilient, their families also have to be resilient. We want to help the whole unit. So looking here, I mentioned air, ground, EMS, emergency medical workers. We know they are taking a beating and they are performing heroically. They're also suffering some pretty significant losses. The Anschutz Foundation was adamant when we created this tool that emergency medical workers also be included. What we've seen from our launch, we had a soft launch back in June. The national formal campaign will launch this month, that nurses are actually the greatest user of our tool. We haven't been able to distinguish how many are hospital-based versus flight and air medical-based, but it's heartening to see them reaching out for this. And there's also content specific to them. Pilots, we also have content specific to them. In recognition, many pilots come with a military history, but also they have a unique role in our medical transport and some unique challenges themselves. Firefighters, especially wildland firefighters, one of the reasons we're so excited about this tool is we know that every wildland firefighter has a smartphone somewhere in their gear. This is accessible to them. Calling hotlines, researching websites, those things aren't necessarily accessible when deployed, and that also counts for FEMA deployments with hurricanes, with COVIDs, and with wildland fires. Very accessible tool for that community. And again, more content put in for them. Oh, and before I mention, we also have content specific to ski patrollers. If you want to make EMS tougher, I've always thought that doing it on skis is a good way to do so. We've done a lot of work with Vail Resorts International, talking about ways to better support their personnel. Again, they're out on the slopes doing the things they love and witnessing some pretty tragic events, and oftentimes feeling very powerless to change the outcomes. Dispatchers, we know that dispatchers suffer from a lot of the stress stimulation that we get, the sympathetic nervous system response, and they are chair-bound. They have a sedentary role. They must turn off mentally and emotionally from one horrific call, pick up the phone for the next, with their heart racing, with their systems flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, unable to expend it physically, and be professional and deal with the next call. We know that they're often screamed at. We know that they are not, that sometimes they're treated with hostility, not only from the callers, but sometimes from the field crews, who are shifting blame to them for things that went wrong on the call, when in fact the dispatchers did everything they could. So again, a really tough occupation, and a group that we are outreaching to support with this tool. Law enforcement goes without saying, very tough time to be a law enforcement officer in the US right now, working to support them and help them get to the new normal, what their next iteration looks like. Corrections officers down in this last corner, 100% ResponderStrong has always served corrections officers. We recognized oftentimes they are the underserved among law enforcement. And right now, especially with the concerns of COVID transmission and closed spaces, corrections is an incredibly challenging place to be. And we have lots of content to help support them. Families, families are struggling with a multitude of issues. Being essentially a single parent while your significant other is working in an essential role, or conversely being trapped at home with the kids and having just way too much together time. Fears about, are the children going back to school? What does that mean if they do? Fears about bringing the virus home to young kids or to significant others, or to extended families and parents. We know that interracial families are really struggling right now, not only with the societal issues, but also with the predisposition of certain minority to extreme cases of COVID. We know particularly the African American communities, the Hispanic communities, and the Native American communities are being hit very hard. And this adds a whole nother layer of complexity and stress, especially if you're out working in the field and you run the risk of bringing it home to your family, to your loved ones. So just lots of stressors for the families. That's another important reason why we wanted to bring them in to this tool and this resource. So again, if you hadn't had the opportunity to pull it up, you can access it through u.responderstrong.org. I wanted to touch on this point before we get to the next tool that we also have available. I mentioned that burnout is being recognized as the most highly correlated stress injury with the COVID responses and 2020 in general. Baylor has started a psychological study for emergency responders. This is the link to find it. They are researching what the signs and symptoms of burnout are, what the causes of burnout are, with the idea that they will get us some evidence-based practices and give us some ideas, some proactive preventive measures and some treatment measures for the backside on this, so that when we are called upon to continue this battle longer than we ever expected, we're ready for it, and that when we do eventually get to the other side, we're prepared to take care of our own. The study is looking for participants right now. There are two different tracks. One will have an initial survey. The other one will have an initial survey and be followed for 6 months. So highly encourage you, if you're interested in the research side of things, check them out. All Clear Foundation, and thanks Jared for giving us such a great intro. All Clear Foundation was stood up about 2 years ago by Global Medical Response. Global Medical Response, the CEO, Randy Owen in particular, saw a need to aggregate funding to support regionally and locally successful responder wellness programs. So responders across all branches and wellness, physical, mental, social, financial, spiritual, programs that are out there to help them scale nationally so they can impact more responders, and to work together as partners with other organizations across the country. Together We Are Stronger has long been one of ResponderStrong's anthems. It is also for All Clear Foundation. All Clear Foundation has been gathering funding to support other wellness-oriented foundations and groups. They have also been building out a cadre of tools and building out a fantastic resource list. If you go to their website and check them out, allclearfoundation.org, there's a list of more than 600 easily navigable resources across the country for responder needs, not just mental health, but a ton of other needs, including some great stuff around childcare, how to help manage homeschooling, and how to work with your children around masks and understanding what's happening at an appropriate developmental level. So tools, you see down here in the chat, Responder Relate. All Clear Foundation partnered with a group called iRelate a couple years ago, who is backed by Microsoft, to create a peer-to-peer chat app to allow responders to connect with others across the country who have had similar work experience, who do similar work, and who want to talk. There are a variety of chat rooms there, so you can locate somebody easily who wants to talk about the same topic that you do. That is an app. It is available through the app stores and readily accessible through your phone. Crisis Text Line, ResponderStrong a couple years ago created a keyword partnership with Crisis Text Line for responders. Any responder in the country can text BADGE to 741-741 24/7 to speak with a trained crisis counselor who gets it, who understands, and will listen and help you stabilize, regulate, and decide what the best path forward is. Safe Call Now, we're all familiar with, they're posted here. And then the U at ResponderStrong tool is also posted here. So there's some fantastic resources on All Clear Foundation. Keep an eye on them. I think you're gonna see great stuff coming out of them in the future. So their website. Responder Relate has its own specific website, but you can also access it through ResponderStrong or All Clear Foundation. And there's ResponderStrong. And we have gotten to the end. Again, our mission is to take care of our own, and we don't draw a lot of boundaries. We recognize the stressors and challenges among emergency response branches are unique, but we've also recognized that we're siblings. We are more similar than we are different. And during this time of extreme duress and stress, we want to do all we can to support you so that you're not only performing well in your job, but you are at home. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. What a great presentation, and so many good tools for people to take advantage of. We do have a few questions, and for those of you that are on, if you have any other questions, please use the Q&A tool in the Zoom, and I'll ask those of Rhonda. So the first one is, how many responders have used the tactical tools?
Fantastic. So we have just been promoting the ResponderStrong tool by word of mouth. In the past 6 weeks, we have more than 4,700 users. The Responder Relate, last I heard, more than 9,000 users. So growing, definitely. The ad campaigns are stepping up for both. Responder Relate is free right now. It will eventually have a 99-cent per month subscription fee, in part to cover the costs of maintaining it, since it's an app and more expensive, but also to help keep trolls out of it. And that's been one of our big concerns in these times, is to ensure that we keep negativity out. We want a safe sanctuary for responders.
That's great. That's great and really important. What mindfulness activities help us be, what mindfulness activities help us be present to practice mindfulness? I think that's supposed to be what mindful activities are there in the tools to help us practice mindfulness.
Fantastic. So in the tools, we have tons of them. One of the most popular ones, and it's a popular one in the tool and also for me personally, are breathing exercises. And yes, of course, we take the responder vernacular and refer to them as tactical breathing exercises. But that is, all of you know as medical professionals, that is one of the fastest ways to get our nervous system down-regulated. The slow, deep breathing with the movement of the diaphragm, triggering our vagus nerve to help stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. None of us really need help stimulating the sympathetic nervous system. That does it all on its own for us. But then there's also another nerve that goes up to the brain that tells the brain, hey, it's okay, everything's all right. So that allows us to help tone down the brain's reactivity, move us out of the amygdala back to our prefrontal cortex. So I love breathing. You can implement it anywhere while you're lying in bed trying to sleep. You can do it while you're flying into a call. You can do it while you're being screamed at by somebody on a call. You can do it when you're trying to downregulate at the ER. I love that one. One of the ways I also enjoy, and this is discussed in the tool also, is telling responders, hey, you know, mindfulness isn't yoga pants and incense. That's a way to get there, but it's not the only way. Mindfulness is anything that allows you to focus, to let the chatter, the constant self-talk, the constant what ifs, the ruminations, the reliving the calls, just fade away and let your mind focus on one thing, which is incredibly restorative. You can do this with mountain biking. You can do it with target shooting. You can do it with painting, with journaling. There are tons of different ways to achieve that mindfulness state, that restful state of the mind. Actual sitting in meditation, that's more geared to not stopping our minds, but making us more aware when our minds are going somewhere that we would rather not, and letting us practice, bring it back into control, much like you would train a puppy, where you've got the puppy who's running off to, I don't know, pee on the carpet, go someplace the puppy's not to, and you keep gently and calmly calling the puppy back, and sooner or later the puppy doesn't do that. It's adopted new behaviors. Our brains are like puppies. So there are a lot of different ways and a ton of different tools for the mindfulness. I personally find it is a tremendous tool in managing stress and toning down my own worst enemy, who's between my ears.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So are there specific strategies to cope with the coronavirus that you can share with us?
Yes. One of the big ones for that is shut the media down. Watch enough to know what you need to know, but don't get sucked into the mire. We know each news organization has their own bias. We know that they like hype, they want likes, they want viewers. They oftentimes present things in a slanted or sensational way, because news is to a certain extent entertainment. We know that also, but really limiting your exposure to that content is key. Know enough to know what's going on, but don't get mired in it. Shutting the news down, the televisions down, in fact, all blue screens down, at least an hour, if not two, before you go to bed can really, really be helpful. And going to bed and getting good rest not only boosts your immune system, hopefully preventing you from developing coronavirus, but it also allows you to sleep better, to get that rest mentally and physically, to process the memories throughout the day. We know one of the hallmarks of post-traumatic stress injury is sleep disruption, and it is believed that that disruption prevents the mind from processing those traumatic memories, worsening the impact and prolonging that impact. So that is a really good thing. Having open discussions with those who are willing to have open discussions with you, family members, loved ones, friends, I think is very key. Talking to them about why you do what you do. We've heard a lot of conflict between friends and family members and responders over feeling that the responder is unnecessarily exposing themselves to this virus and potentially endangering others. Being able to have a calm, non-reactive conversation with them to talk about the ways you protect yourself, the mask, the extra protective equipment, the hand washing, the testing if you're doing testing, all of those things to help reassure them. We know that most people, when they come at us with anger, and when we come at others with anger, we are working from a place of fear. So really working hard to hear the fear behind the anger of the statement can help get resolution for that. Again, also coronavirus, staying hydrated, eating well, not eating crap, which is one of the things we all like to do when we're stressed. Has some short-term benefit, long-term does not. So a lot of those things are just simple practices. Again, simple, maybe not easy, but they're not rocket science. It's just something we have to put into play every day.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. I am guilty of maybe not eating as well as I should have been the last few weeks, because it's easy to snack and, everything's right here at my home. So that makes it a little more challenging. The last question we have, and if anybody else wants to ask more questions, please do. We've got a few more minutes left. How do we improve our resiliency in COVID times? I know that you mentioned some things just now, but are there some other ways that we can do that?
Absolutely. And I think it goes back to identifying where you might be remiss in supporting your self-care. So there's a lot of ways to do that. With the reality checks inside the ResponderStrong tool, you get private opportunities to look and rate how well is your social life? How well is your spiritual life? What are you doing to take care of yourself? What does your physical activity look like? How much tension are you holding in your muscles? And as medical professionals, you all understand that connection, that when we're in sympathetic nervous system overdrive, it increases the tone in muscles for fight or flight or freeze. But over long term, that causes muscular aches and pains, neck and shoulders, where a lot of us carry that. That causes us added distress. And it also tells the brain that we're not safe because we're just one big old biofeedback loop. So a great way to protect ourselves is doing some slow, gentle stretches before bed, telling the muscles to relax, easing them up, and they will in turn tell the brain it's okay and go to sleep. I love journaling. And I think this is a great way to download whatever's going on, to process it, to keep our brains from keeping us awake at night. So again, it's another way to get to good sleep, which is one of the foundations of resilience. But the other thing that journaling does is it allows us to start processing and start recognizing when we're going somewhere negative. We can get mired in the swamp that is our minds during the day, just going one negative thought to another negative thought to another one without realizing it, especially. And as responders, we can kind of get this way, that our culture, we have a strong negativity bias. It was developed for us to survive evolutionarily. You're skipping along a forest path and you don't notice a daisy. No big deal. You don't notice the rattlesnake, it could have a fatal outcome. Emergency response work hones that skill to a fine edge, that bias, because we're always looking for, is the patient decompensating? What could go wrong? How do we take proactive action against this? So our minds are wired to go to the negative when we're with a group of coworkers, of responders who are also wired to look for the negative. We might not notice how negative our thoughts have gotten, how negative our speech has gotten. But when we're journaling and writing it down, we can see it on paper and decide consciously, is this where I want to go and how can I redirect it? So it's almost like a written form of meditation. I think that is a great way to increase resilience. Making sure that you don't isolate and you get quality time with people that you care about. We know that face-to-face communication is really what lights up those social centers in our brain neurologically. But if all you have is this, Zoom, FaceTime, a phone call, socially distanced time at the park or outside the coffee shop, whatever, all of those things are drops that help fill your bucket with resiliency, that help you take care of yourself. And also making sure that you're having some boundaries. That tends to be another thing that responders aren't good at, is we're here to save the world and we want to get involved in everything. And the crazier it is, the more hectic it is, we want to be involved. I see this a lot in the fire service with firefighters wanting to listen to the radio off duty. Like, turn that stuff off. It's not even good for you when you're in the station. If dispatch needs you, they'll let you know. You don't need this sympathetic nervous system stimulation, because after a while that gets to be your threshold. Other things in life don't look as exciting. You start doing that insidious worldview slide that is so often the cause of relationship issues for us. So anyway, making sure you get some downtime to really enjoy what you do. Time out in nature. One of my favorite resilience building tools. There is a ton of research that shows as little as 20 minutes out in nature, whatever that looks like for you, a garden, out by a river, on a beach, in the mountains, wherever you can get someplace that's green and natural and outdoors, really has a calming effect on your sympathetic nervous system and a calming effect on your mind. So that's another super easy way. Again, 20 minutes. It doesn't take a full hour. Another point, talking about time, a lot of people feel like if they don't have an hour for a workout, they can't do anything. If they can't go to the gym because it's closed, they can't do anything. just moving around, doing a couple sit-ups on the floor, a couple push-ups, going out for a walk, doing something that is movement oriented is good for your mind, it's good for your body, it helps relieve that tension and stress, helps burn through the stress hormones. It doesn't have to be a long period of time.
That's great. This is a really good question. Denial is one of the biggest problems. How do you direct someone that really needs it to things like your website when they don't see they need it?
That's the $1 million question.
Right.
I think the biggest influence we have over our peers is the way we live, the way we walk rather than we talk. We know lots of times people are resistant to hearing the verbal message. With you should. None of us like to be told what we should do, but even just saying, man, I've been on this tool, there is some awesome information around something that you know that individual's interested in, nutrition or family, how to work with your kids, whatever it is. Try and hook them that way. Just talk about how much of a benefit it's been for you without ever making a suggestion you should do it too. You can also take some of the information that you find in the tool that you think they might benefit from and bring it up. Hey, I was reading this thing the other day. Did you know? And, you know, kind of subtly, not subconsciously, I forget the word. Anyway, bring it in under their radar. And, you know, ultimately you can provide the right environment, you can provide the right support. It's ultimately their choice. So that's where kind of your boundaries come in too. Don't spend so much time focused on somebody else that it leads to frustration for you. You care, you're concerned, approach it as well as you can. Denial's tough. And we see it played out in the national scene. All the people who still think that COVID is a hoax and are convinced of it, that's driven by fear and denial. They're overwhelmed. And that's been one of the most significant factors that we've seen as a society is COVID and the resulting social unrest or the aftermath have really created this deep level of uncertainty and instability that has knocked everybody off their balance. In the attempt to know something for certain, people are grasping onto untruths and denials and trying to pretend that this is fine, it's a hoax, it's going to go away. And that's a really tough barrier to overcome. Professional help is always valuable. Again, if somebody's in denial, it's hard to convince them that they should go for professional help because they don't have a problem we do. But yeah, do what you can, try to do it surreptitiously. That's the word I was looking for.
Do you find, you know, for a long time, it's been very taboo to talk about, you know, feelings and depression and, you know, potential suicidal thoughts. Do you feel that with the research that's coming out now and that continues to come out that supports that people who are in first responder positions have a higher risk, do you think that taboo will start to go away and it will be more acceptable for people to have these open conversations? Because I think there's something that you're meant to save lives and you're not allowed to have, you know, those feelings after you've been to a trauma. So do you think that's changing?
Absolutely, and thank you for asking. So GMR, one of the contracts that it holds is FEMA's disaster emergency medical contractor. So we had 2,200 people on the ground in New York and New Jersey for the 2 months from late March to late May. What we found there from our wellness officers was that the stressors of 2020 have finally gotten so extreme and so prevalent that many responders are now making these leaps ahead and dropping the shame and the internal stigma about talking about how they're impacted, because it's now being recognized more readily that, yeah, the response I'm having is the totally normal and appropriate and acceptable response to the stimuli that I'm in right now. And we found with a lot of our personnel that it was opening the doors. Not only does this bother me, but let me tell you about the things that have bothered me over the past 10, 20, 30 years. So I think this is one of the positive benefits that will come out of this whole year, is that I feel like we are being catapulted ahead in awareness and in decreasing stigma and increasing personal openness to admitting what's happening on the inside and reaching out for help without that shame and that stigma.
That's great. That's really good to know. So we have one last question. How do you debrief after a transport when you're trying to save the world and plan for the worst on that transport?
Oh, thank you for asking that question. So this has been a big topic we've had with a lot of our personnel. Emergency responders hold ourselves to high standards, and we have our own very strict, often subconscious ideas of what determines success on any given call. Oftentimes with cardiac arrest, the only measure we have for success is resuscitation. This was something that came up a lot, particularly in New York City, when resuscitation wasn't an option. With the crisis protocols, ICU beds weren't available. a lot of patients weren't worked in the field that our personnel would have worked in the past. That is just a huge moral affront to emergency medical providers who've been trained. This is our skill, this is our tool, this is what we do. The follow-up to that was that many times the providers were then required to bag the heads of the body that they were leaving on scene to prevent the spread of COVID. Again, another huge moral insult. And it had a huge demoralizing impact on the emergency medical workers there. What we talked to them about is, hey, let's talk about what you did on that call, what you provided on that call, because you did do good things and you can't discount those. If you're only focused on the negative, going back to that negativity bias, we didn't successfully resuscitate. No, but you were there for that person. If they cored in front of you, they didn't die alone. And there has been tremendous accounting across the country with how much that's meant, especially to the survivors, the family members who know that their significant other didn't die alone because EMS was there. Just amazing benefit for that. We also know that you're there to provide closure for the family. Having somebody tell a family member that their loved one is no longer with us in a kind and compassionate way that allows the space for them to begin the grief journey and the process, not making it awkward, which is always awkward for us, but not showing that it is, that has tremendous benefit. Maybe we can't change the outcome, those cards are already dealt, but look at the good things that you did on that call. And keep focusing on those good things. You have to look for them because you're not wired. You're wired to look for points of failure. And if you do that, you're going to burn out during this event, or you may already be burning out after this event. So that's one of the things I really encourage people to do is, talk about how you feel with your partner or with anybody else who responded. That really sucked. I feel like we failed. And then talk about, yeah, but we did this, we did that, we did this, and really try to reframe it. And we all know that reframing is one of the big psychological skills and tools. It's not easy. It's not the way we typically operate. And I think that's one of the other negative parts of our culture is when we get into self-beration, self-flagellation, rumination over how we could have done better, how we could have done more. We think we're making ourselves better. We're not. We're beating ourselves down. And we need to move away from that too. The way we make ourselves better is through training and through taking care of ourselves so that we're functioning at our optimal level for the next call.
That's great. Thank you so much. This was an excellent presentation. Great tools. Thank you to All Clear Foundation. There's just so much good information out there. We appreciate you taking time to share it with our audience, and we wish you the best as you continue to move on and improve it. And we hope that this really helps some people out there as they're struggling with some of the challenges you discussed. So thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who attended, and I hope you all have a good day.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Bye, Rhonda.
Bye.